Okay, so we are today our final class on the book of Numbers. It is a double portion this week, Matot and Masei, and that takes us to the very end of Numbers. And if I look at what we have in this week's Torah portion, and I kind of see it not only with what in perspective of this week's Torah portion, but if I look at it as a summary of the whole book of Numbers, we called our series the Nitty Gritty of Nationhood. And that's because we see the book of Numbers as really being the book where we see the nation of Israel developing. The book itself spans close to 40 years. There's a big part in the middle, about 38 years, that we know very little, nothing about actually. It's skipped in the middle. But we see a lot of things that are going on, constant mistakes, sins that the nation is doing, Moses having to deal with it, God punishing. A new generation comes in. So I guess you could say, when we're talking about the nitty gritty of nationhood, they come out in the book of Exodus, they left Egypt in this high and great, miracles, and they received the Ten Commandments, they received the word of God, then they build the tabernacle. It all seems on this unbelievable, ideal kind of high. When we get through into the book of Numbers, we see that actually being a nation means dealing with all kinds of things, including rebellion, including resentment of Moses and his leadership, including dealing with different sorts of enemies, and then preparing to go into the land of Israel. But what we see, I think, in these final chapters is really that the perspective is less on the mistakes or the sins, and the perspective is more on love. That's how I would characterize this. Love of God for the nation of Israel, love of the land of Israel. There is so much beauty and love interspersed in these parts, even with the stories. And that's the perspective that I would like to share with you today. So I first want to start with chapter 32. This is a story. This is a whole story. The whole chapter is a story. And it's a story, I think, that is well known. It begins, the Reubenites and the Gadites had a great deal of cattle, and they saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilead, and they said, oh, this is a good place for cattle, for grazing. And basically what this happened is the children of Israel, as you know, there's this Jordan River that's the border between east of Israel and west. And that's a very significant border because it's a border that Moses is not going to be able to cross. The land east of the Jordan is called different things. It too becomes part of it is part of the land of Israel. It's comes in under the control of the children of Israel. But it's not the same as the part west of the Jordan River. That's the part that Moses is not allowed to enter. So clearly that part has something more special about it, more sacred, more central to it. And of course, we feel that way today. The part east of the Jordan is in the hands of Jordan. Many, many years ago, at the beginning of the Zionist movement, the revisionist movement had a song that kind of represented their approach to Zionism. And the song had these famous lines: the Jordan has two banks, an eastern one and a western one. And their claim at that point was, why are we sufficing with the claim of all the land west of the Jordan? We should also be claiming the land east of the Jordan, because that also is part of historic land of Israel, which it is, but it's still not the same. And the part we're in today is clearly the central part. And therefore, Moses also takes part in the battles to defeat the Amorites who are east of the Jordan River. And after that battle is completed, it is these two tribes, Reuben and Gad, who take a look. They have accumulated a great deal of cattle and sheep and whatever, livestock. And they look at the area there and they say, this is great grazing land. We want to stay here. Moses is not happy. And the question is, why is Moses, what is he afraid of? And it becomes clear what he's afraid of in the way that Reuben and Gad respond to him, and then how Moses accepts their response. First of all, Moses is saying to them, he's concerned. He says this very, very clearly in verse 6. He says, are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? So his first concern is they're going to get out of the hard part. Very nice that they participated in this initial war, but that's just a small part. The main battle is after they cross the Jordan. So Moses is concerned that they're trying to just get out of the hard part of the battle. Okay, but then Moses adds something else. Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that the Lord has given them? That is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to survey the land. He hears this request on the part of the Reubenites and Gadites, and he hears in his mind the spies all over again. The spies who come back and give that bad report to the people in the desert and say, no, we can't go up. He's concerned that this is going to create an effect, a certain domino effect that will again repeat history. And these people say, no, we too don't want to go in. What do we need to go in for? Either we're afraid or we don't need it or whatever. Let's stay here on the eastern part. But then these two tribes assure Moses that that's not at all where they're coming from. That number one, they volunteer not only to join the nation of Israel in battle, but to be at the very head of the line. They're going to be the first, the front troops, the scouts that go out and lead battle. So there's certainly not a concern about their bravery. But the other thing they say is that, it's not that we're interested in separating ourselves. It's not that we're interested in not having people go in, but we just like this land. It's good for ourselves, but we're not going to, we're going to wait. We're going to settle this land only after we finish the rest of the nation, what the rest of the nation has. And we can see, though, that this fear that Moses has actually continues into Joshua's time, because in Joshua chapter 1, Joshua was first taking over and kind of establishing himself as a leader of the people. One of the first things he does in verse 12 is he turns to the Reubenites. This is chapter 1, verse 12 in Joshua. Turns to the Reubenites and reminds them of the promise they made to Moses of going to go in with them and not getting settled until after the rest of the land is conquered. And then they answered Joshua. They said, we will do everything you have commanded us, and we will go wherever you send us. We will obey you just as we obeyed Moses. And in fact, they are going to end up being the people who go first. They're going to be at the head of the line, leading the rest of the nation into battle. But that does not end the story there, because at the end of the book of Joshua, in chapter 22, this is after the wars are finished and they go and settle the land and everybody goes back to their tribes. And these tribes, together with half of the tribe of Manasseh, go across and settle in these places. And we have a description of that. They're going where they go, where they settle, the cities that they build. And then we have, this is Joshua 22, verse 11. We have suddenly a crisis brewing. Okay, the children of Israel heard that the Reubenites and the Gadites and half of the tribe of Manasseh have built an altar opposite the land of Canaan, right at the passageways of the Jordan. What's the problem here? They're concerned that they are going to separate themselves. Why are they building an altar if the tabernacle has come to rest in Shiloh? Well, that is supposed to be the central altar of all of Israel. The people from all over the land are supposed to go there for the pilgrimage festivals, including the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half of the tribe of Manasseh. They're supposed to come across to the altar in Shiloh. So as soon as they hear that they're building an altar, the first thing they're saying is they're going to build a rival religious center. And if you start with a rival religious center, the next thing you know, you're a rival nation. Keep in mind, hundreds of years later, okay, after the death of Solomon, when the northern kingdom indeed breaks off from Judah and Benjamin, from the kingdom of Judah, what is one of the first things that Jeroboam does? He establishes a temple in Bethel and a temple in Dan. So one of the first things that Jeroboam did in order to establish his independence and separation from the southern kingdom is to build rival temples. Of course, his temples had golden calves. That's a whole different problem. But he was developing rival religious centers. And so this is what they were afraid of. They send Phineas and a delegation of people across to see what's going on. And they discover they're not building an altar at all. They're merely building a monument. And their goal is not to separate, but to connect. A monument that will help them direct their attention over to the western side of the land, to the west of the Jordan, the River Jordan, and in that sense, keep the nation together. But you can see throughout this story that there's this underlying concern that really encompasses two things that are connected: the unity of the nation and the connection of the nation to the land of Israel. Will these people remain connected to the land of Israel, the main part of the land of what we're talking about, the part west of the Jordan River, and will they remain in unity with the rest of the nation? So I think we already have there this idea of the importance of the connection, the love of the nation, the love for the nation of one another, the sticking together, shall we say, and the love for the land. But there's more of a dedication, a devotion to the land, or caring about the land. You don't actually see this idea of love expressed. But I would like to kind of focus on we look at chapter 32 now, totally different subject. Chapter 32 has long been seen as one of those really boring chapters, okay? And forgive me, I know there are people who think it's extremely sacrilegious to say that any part of the Bible is boring, but let's be honest. I remember as a kid, you know, anytime we read these chapters that were lists of genealogies or lists of places, or, you know, you say, oh my God, what is this? Okay, you have a similar thing in the book of Joshua. I think it's chapter 21, maybe. There's this whole list of kings. All there is lists of kings, and it's a list of all these different, it's chapter 12, Joshua chapter 12. It's this whole list of cities and kings and cities and kings. Okay, like, you know, and there are archaeologists and people who are experts in geography and whatever that are very excited about that list because it tells them something, and then they look for, I don't know, archaeological remains in those places, or they look to find where that city is. But for most of us, when reading lists, we're not so interested. And the same is for chapter 33. Chapter 33 begins, these were the travels of the children of Israel who left Egypt in their multitudes, led by Moses and Aaron. And then we have here, and that Moses wrote or recorded the starting points of their journeys based on the word of God. And these are their travels based on their starting points. And then what we have a whole list. And they traveled from Ramses in the first month, and the 15th of the month, the first month after the Passover. Okay, that's a little bit more. The beginning of it starts, okay, they tell about Passover in Egypt and everything. But starting in verse 5, the children of Israel traveled from Ramses, and they camped in Sukkot. And they traveled from Sukkot, and they camped in Etam. And they traveled from Etam, and they camped in Chirot. And on and on and on. They traveled for, they camped in. They traveled from, they camped in. And you're saying to yourself, what do we need to have all this detail for? So a few years ago, I heard a teaching from a very, very well-known Bible teacher here in Israel. And he said, you have to look at these, and he says a few of these lists. He also talks about it, by the way, in Joshua chapter 12, the list of the kings. He said, this is a song. This is a song. This is not a list of facts. This is not a story. It is a song. What kind of song? I think if we think about victory poetry or victory songs, which were very, very common in the ancient world, okay? You would very often, a king or an emperor would conquer territories, and he would come back to his nation, and somebody, the court poet, would compose a song. And the song would be something, and he went with his great armies, and he went to this city and he captured it. And he went to this city and he captured it. Went to this city and he captured it. On and on and on, with all the detail and all the repetition. The repetition, of course, is very characteristic of poetry, okay? But think of it not as something you read, but as something you say or sing. And then the repetition becomes rhythm. And the repetition creates an atmosphere, creates a climatic kind of experience. And he's going on, and they went here, and they went there, and they went there, and they went there, and they went there. And all of a sudden, it's not just a boring list of places. It becomes something far different. So I would call this poetry or song, okay? And if I compare it to a victory battle, when a victory poetry, when you're listing all the battles that were won. There's no battles here. There's a few battles interspersed, but we'll get to that in a second. You're listing all the battles. Here, what are you doing? You are praising the emperor. You are praising the king who has won all these battles. So I look at this list of places and I say, what are they doing here? They're praising God. They start out by talking about the very miracle of the Exodus from Egypt. It's very under key. It's not in detail, but it's there, you know. It was on the day after Passover offering. The Israelites started out defiantly in plain view of all the Egyptians. The Egyptians, meanwhile, were bearing those among them who the Lord had struck down, every firstborn, whereby the Lord executed judgment on their gods. The Israelites set out from Ramses. So it starts with this background of miracle, and then with that as the background, we start our journey away from slavery towards the land of Egypt. Now we know, because we've already read 4 books, okay, 3 of them having to do with this: Exodus, Leviticus, and now Numbers. So we know that that journey was not smooth. That what should have been a direct journey leaving Egypt and within a few weeks getting the Torah, getting the 10 Commandments, and a few weeks later entering the land of Israel ends up being 40 years of headache with a lot of ups and downs and a lot of death and punishment and all kinds of intrigues and all kinds of things. But what these verses do is turn the whole experience into one single perspective that is positive, that is good, that is a song of love to God that says, you took us out of Egypt and you took us from here to there, to there, to here, to here, to here, to there. And we arrived, and we are now at the doorsteps of the land of Israel. And that in and of itself, I think, takes something that normally would have been so boring and turns it into something that's truly glorious, and gives us a whole different perspective. But again, I want to focus on the difference between poetry and prose. Prose tells you the story. Prose gives you the details because it's like a historical account. It wants you to know what happened. It may want you to learn lessons from the details of what happened. But poetry creates an atmosphere, creates an emotion. And that's really what this is all about. Now, what's interesting about this song is that, and we're going to see, I'm going to compare it to another song, but first look at this one. It's slightly interrupted, okay? We get this list of places starting in verse 3 through verse 37. That's a lot of verses. The verses are very, very short, okay? But then we have a little teeny interruption that's prose, okay? Verse 38. Aaron the priest ascended Mount Hor at the command of the Lord and died there in the 40th year after the Israelites left the land of Egypt on the first day of the 5th month. Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor, and the Canaanite king of Arad, who dwelt in the Negev in the land of Canaan, learned of the coming of the Israelites. So first of all, there's a pause in this song, and we learn of a very sad fact: Aaron has died. We don't get any of the details of the death of Aaron, but we get this fact. And then this verse 40 is weird. The Canaanites heard of the coming of the Israelites, and that's it. What happens next? So what he heard, what did he do? How did he react? What was the significance of that verse? We don't know, because the very next verse goes back again, and they went from Hor Hahar and they end up in Salmona. I mean, the story interrupts because in verse 37, it tells us they got to Hor Hahar, to Mount Har, okay? And it tells you what happened in Mount Hor, which is 2 things. Aaron died and the Canaanites heard. And then it goes on to 41, back to the song of, and they went from here and they went from there, okay? So first of all, let's go back a few chapters ago, okay? Let's go back and see, this story is actually told. Let's go back to Numbers 21, verse 10. Okay, and here it says, very interesting though, verse 10 through, let's see, beginning of 16, parallels very much what we have in our chapters in our Torah portion today. Okay, in chapter 33. Here, again, we have, and the Israelites traveled, and they camped in Ovot, and they traveled from Ovot, and they camped in the Iyeh Abarim, in the desert, near Moab. And then they traveled from there, and they camped in Nachazar. It's also the same thing. They traveled from here, they camped to here. It's very, very similar. You could even say there's this element of poetry here that's stuck in here. But what happened before? Okay. If we go back to the end of chapter 20, we learn that chapter 20, verse 27, we have here the ceremony of the death of Aaron, which we've already read. Aaron goes up, they transfer his clothes to his son. It's a very beautiful, beautiful ceremony. And we learn that he dies. And then the very beginning of 21, we have almost the same verse that we just read. The Canaanite herd. Again, we have the Canaanite herd. If we look at 33, where were we? Going to have to keep our fingers in two places. Okay. So in 33, verse 40, it says, the Canaanite king of Arad, who dwelt in the Negev in the land of Canaan, learned of the coming of the Israelites. And in our verse here, chapter 21, verse 1, the Canaanite heard, king of Arad, who dwells in the Negev, that the Israelites were coming via Atarim. Okay, it starts almost identical words, but then it goes on to say what we don't have in chapter 33. Here it goes on to say they attacked Israel, that they captured many people of Israel, that it was a terrible, terrible battle. Okay, and they lost a lot of people. Okay, I mean, it was a terrible defeat. It was a terrible battle. So that we know about from 21. But when we're in 33, we don't really know what happened. And I think because in 33, we're in the middle of this song. And the purpose of the song is not to tell us about battles and deaths. It's about teaching the glory of God and of the love of God for the nation. But on the other hand, the truth of the matter is we could have left out verse 40. We could have said, and Aaron died, and that's it. By putting in verse 40, it is clear that the reader knows, the people at that time sitting in the desert know, they know what happened in Horahar. They remember that the Canaanite king from Arad came and attacked them, and it was a terrible battle, and people were killed and people were taken prisoner. It was a very difficult thing. It's a hint. We're given a hint of it. We don't want to gloss over it. We don't want to pretend it never existed, but it's not the purpose of this particular type of poetry. There's poetry here that is not going to gloss over, but on the other hand, not going to skip it. Okay, it won't gloss over it. It'll have a hint to it, but it doesn't it doesn't become the focus. Beforehand, it's part of the focus, because beforehand, we're talking about the things they did good and the things they did bad and the different challenges they had. What happens right after that battle is there's a sin, okay? There's a sin, and God punishes them and sends all those snakes to attack them. There is sin here, okay? But in the middle of a poetry in chapter 33, we don't want to talk about battles and death and sin. We just want to glorify God in the overall perspective of the journey towards the land of Israel. Now, going back to chapter 21 again, there's another part that is also, here again, we have this kind of a song. It's the opposite. In chapter 33, we have a song that's interrupted by the occasional prose. In chapter 21, we have the prose that's interrupted by the occasional song. And the song here is this travels beginning in verse 10, but beginning in verse 17, we have an actual song that it's spelled out for us. We learned, and then Israel sang this song. First of all, let's read verse 16. From there, they went to Be'erah. Be'erah comes from the word well, which is Be'er. They go to some place that's named for a well. And what do we learn in verse 16? From there to Be'er, which is the well where the Lord said to Moses, assemble the people that I may give them water. Then Israel sang this song. And we have this beautiful song thanking God for the well. Spring up, O well, sing to it, the well which the chieftains dug, which the moles of the people started, with maces with their own staffs. Now, a few chapters ago, we read about this story about where God told to Moses, gather the people before the rock and I will bring forth water. And where did it end up? There was sin. There was punishment. It was at that very place that Moses and Aaron are told they will not be able to enter into the land of Israel. This was not a happy event. And yet here, in this short song, we have it glossed over. We have the song of the journey where they go to the Be'er. We have a hint of what happened, but we only hear the good part. Earlier, when we heard the story of the sin, we didn't learn about the singing of this song of praise to God for the well. No, they both happened. There was sin, and yet there was water. And the rebuke to Moses and Aaron, we don't even know how much the nation of Israel knew about all of that. The story, as we learned it a few chapters earlier, focuses on God's anger at Moses and Aaron. But here, in this part, we learn about the perspective of the nation of Israel, how God loves the nation of Israel, and he brings them water out of a rock. As a result, they sing his praises. And so here again, we see that the song is not a historical record. A song is meant to give us perspective. A perspective that's not about what you should and should not do and beware, because if you do this, God will punish you and, learn your lesson. There is place here for the song, and the song gives you love. The song shows you the love of God to the nation and the love of the nation to God. It shows the love of the nation to the land of Israel and God's love for the nation, and that he's bringing the nation to the land of Israel and giving them this amazing, amazing gift. Let's look at the very end in chapter 34. The last, no, not chapter 30. Okay, first of all, chapter 34 comes next after we finished all the journeys. Okay, then we have chapter 34, which is about boundaries. So after we sing the song of love to God for bringing us on this journey that will ultimately take us to the land, what we learn in chapter 34 is what parts of the land they're going to receive. Where are the borders? Which tribes get each border? Okay, or the tribes of the land. And so it's if you think about it, if you're about to move to a new house, you just bought a house and you're about to move and you're really, really excited, you're going to pull out the map and you're going to want to look at all the streets nearby your house and where's the nearby shopping center and where's the park nearby. And this is an act of love. It's not just some people just do it for practicality. How many blocks is it from the nearest grocery store? Is it going to take me a long time to go get milk? But I would say that many people, when they're excited about moving to a new place and they open that map, it's part of the act of love. Wow, look at the park, look at the river nearby, look at the school where my kids are going to go to school. And that's what's going on here. God here is giving these boundaries to help them. Oh my God, this is the map. Let me draw you the map. The land that I love, the land that you will love. This is let's look at the map together and really come to love and appreciate it. And finally, in the last chapter of the book, in chapter 36, we have the final chapter of the story of the daughters of Zelophehad that come to Moses. We learned about that a few weeks ago. They come to Moses asking for their own inheritance because their father died, leaving no sons. And they get that promise. They're given that land. And in the end of this book, we have an addendum where the other people from their tribe, from the tribe of Manasseh, go to Moses and say, but we have a problem. Because these women, if they are to marry men who are not from our tribe, the Benjamin tribe, from the Manasseh tribe, their land is going to end up moving to the tribe of the husbands, because this is the biblical law. The land goes after the husband. And so they set a rule down here, and they said, okay, these women can marry anyone they like. Remember that, not an arranged marriage. They can marry anyone they like, but it should be within their tribe so that they can preserve the land within the tribe. And the final words here of this story, the daughters of Tzalafachad did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Machla, Tirza, Chogla, Milka, and Noah. Tzalafchad's daughters were married to sons of their uncles, marrying into clans of descendants of Manasseh, son of Joseph, so their share remained in the tribe of their father's clan. To me, this is an amazing expression of the two loves that we talked about from the beginning. The love of the nation. Here it's the tribe, the desire to keep the unity of the tribe in one place with its own territory. As representative of the love of the entire nation, the desire to stick together and remain one nation and remain united in this way. But also an expression of the love that they had for the land. They were doing this so that they can preserve the inheritance that they had been given in the land of Israel. That's my message for today. If you want to unmute yourselves and ask questions or make comments, I'm happy to hear.
I have a little tune going around in my head now. It's a campfire song that I learned, but I think the poetry and it's a encouraging way to bring in camaraderie, and they're probably adding on as they march along day after day, camp after camp, making the song grow longer and longer, and they're memorizing their past and looking into the future as a group.
That's a brilliant way of looking at it. I love that. The song that accompanies them as they journey. That's beautiful. That is really beautiful. Thank you. Okay, well, everybody, have a great weekend. Shabbat Shalom. Great to see you. Next week, we are starting Deuteronomy, and we're going to put out an email on that, I think tomorrow, to everybody on our list, which is a lot of people. So we may have some newcomers next week that want to start fresh with us on this new book. If you know anybody you think that might want to study Deuteronomy with us, we'll be doing that next Thursday.
Okay.
Take it easy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.